hospital hallway still smelled of antiseptic and rain when Daniel Rahman realized his life was over. He stood outside the administrator's office, his hands trembling, the faint stain of dried blood still visible beneath his fingernails no matter how hard he had scrubbed. 20 minutes earlier, he had been a respected nurse, a single father who worked double shifts to keep food on the table. Now he was unemployed, accused of misconduct, and walking out of the only career he had ever loved. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in doing what's right even when it costs you everything, take a moment right now to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Daniel had not meant to break protocol. He had only meant to save a life. The night before had been chaos. The emergency room was understaffed. 2 nurses had called in sick, and a storm had flooded half the city. Around 11:40 p.m., paramedics rushed in with a woman in her early 30s, unconscious, her forehead split open from what looked like a car accident. Blood streamed down her face, pooling against the stretcher's metal frame. The on-call physician was stuck in traffic, trapped behind a multi-vehicle collision caused by the storm. Daniel had years of experience assisting in suturing, but hospital policy strictly forbade nurses from performing the procedure independently unless under direct supervision. Still, as he pressed gauze against the woman's head, he could see the wound was deep. Every second counted. He remembered thinking about his 8-year-old daughter, Ayasia, waiting at home with a neighbor. He remembered how small she had looked the first time she had scraped her knee and cried in his arms. He remembered promising himself that he would never stand by while someone suffered if he could help. So he made the choice. He sterilized the area, stitched carefully, methodically, his hands steady despite the pressure. He worked the way he had seen doctors work 100 times before. When the physician finally arrived nearly 20 minutes later, the bleeding had stopped. The woman's vitals were stable. She was breathing normally. For a brief moment, Daniel felt relief. But relief in hospitals can be fleeting. By morning, hospital administration had reviewed security footage. The woman's family, influential and well-connected, had filed a formal complaint not about the outcome, but about the violation of procedure. It didn't matter that he had saved her from further blood loss. It didn't matter that she was stable because of him. Policy was policy. You acted beyond your authority, they told him. There was no mention of heroism, no acknowledgement of urgency, just paperwork and liability. Daniel tried to explain. He spoke about the storm, about the delayed doctor, about the severity of the wound. But the board had already made up its mind. They needed someone to blame, someone to demonstrate accountability. And he was expendable. By 2 p.m., Daniel was packing his locker into a small cardboard box. A photo of Aisha with missing front teeth, a worn-out stethoscope he had bought with his first paycheck, a thank you card from an elderly patient he had once stayed with long after his shift ended. He walked out into the gray afternoon feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. At home, Aisha ran to him as she always did, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist. He forced a smile, lifting her into the air as if nothing had changed. He made her favorite dinner, that nightingale soup and risiven, though his appetite was gone. When she asked why he was home early, he told her he had the day off. After she fell asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at the unpaid bills. Rent was due in 10 days. His savings were thin after covering Aisha's school fees and his mother's medication before she passed last year. Nursing wasn't just a job. It was stability. It was identity. It was dignity. Now it was gone. He barely slept. The next morning, his phone buzzed repeatedly. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was another hospital email about termination documents. But the calls kept coming. Unknown numbers. Messages piling up. Confused, he finally opened one. It was a news link. The headline read, "Nurse fired after saving woman's life during storm emergency." His heart pounded as he clicked. The woman he had stitched at her name was Layla Hassan, had regained consciousness earlier that morning. She had learned what happened, and she had spoken. According to the article, Layla was not just any patient. She was the daughter of Kareem Hassan, a prominent businessman known throughout the city for his philanthropic foundations and medical investments. When Layla heard that the nurse who treated her had been fired for breaking protocol to save her life, she had publicly defended him. She told reporters that if Daniel had waited for a doctor, She might have suffered severe blood loss or permanent damage. She called him courageous. She called him selfless, and the story went viral. Within hours, social media exploded. Thousands of people shared the article, outraged that a man who acted in an emergency to save a life was punished instead of praised. Nurses across the country posted messages of support. Doctors weighed in, many admitting they would have made the same call. Daniel sat frozen at the table, his coffee growing cold. By noon, his phone rang again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was Kareem Hassan himself. The man's voice was calm, steady, powerful. He thanked Daniel for saving his daughter. He apologized for the hospital's decision, explaining that neither he nor Layla had filed the complaint. It had been initiated automatically by risk management after reviewing footage. He said he was reviewing his investments in the hospital and was deeply disappointed. Then he said something Daniel never expected. He wanted to meet. They met that afternoon at a quiet cafe. Daniel wore his only blazer, slightly worn at the elbows. Kareem arrived without an entourage, without arrogance. Just a father grateful that his daughter was alive. Layla joined them, a faint bandage still visible near her hairline. She looked at Daniel with eyes full of sincerity and told him she remembered drifting in and out of consciousness, hearing his calm voice, feeling his steady hands. She told him she felt safe. Those words alone were worth more than any paycheck. But Kareem had something more. He explained that he had been planning to expand his charitable foundation into community health care, clinics, places where underserved families could receive quality medical attention without fear of cost or bureaucracy. He said he needed leaders who valued patients over paperwork. He offered Daniel a position not just as a nurse, but as the clinical director of the first clinic, a place where emergency decisions would be guided by compassion as well as policy. A place where nurses would be trained and empowered, not silenced. The salary was higher than what Daniel had earned at the hospital. The benefits included healthcare, housing support, and education assistance for ISIA. Daniel felt tears he had held back for 2 days finally break free. 24 hours earlier, he had lost everything. Now, he was being handed a chance to build something meaningful. But the true change wasn't just professional. When the news broke about his new position, something shifted in the community. Former patients began sending messages of gratitude. Strangers dropped off groceries at his door before he could even process what was happening. Parents wrote to him, thanking him for being an example of courage their children could look up to. Aisha, too, began to understand. One evening, as they walked past the park, she slipped her hand into his and told him her teacher had talked about him in class. She said her father was a hero. Daniel knelt down to her level, his heart swelling. He told her he wasn't a hero. He was just someone who did what he thought was right. But maybe that's what heroes really are. The clinic opened 3 months later in a modest building near a low-income neighborhood, often overlooked by larger hospitals. On opening day, Daniel stood by the entrance, greeting families who had long waited for accessible care. He hired nurses who had once felt undervalued. He created clear emergency protocols that balanced safety with flexibility. He built a place where compassion was not punishable. One afternoon, a young boy came in with a deep cut on his arm after falling from a bicycle. The attending nurse hesitated, glancing toward Daniel for approval. He nodded calmly, standing beside her as she stitched carefully. He wasn't just leading a clinic. He was changing a culture, and in the quiet moments, when the waiting room was empty and sunlight streamed through the windows, Daniel would sometimes think back to that hallway outside the administrator's office. He would remember how defeated he had felt, how certain he was that his life had collapsed. If only he had known that sometimes, losing a door means finding a purpose. Before this story comes to an end, I want to ask you something from the heart. If Daniel's journey moved you even a little, if it reminded you that integrity still matters in this world, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more stories that restore faith in humanity. And here's something special: comment the word courage below if you believe doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it costs you. Because Daniel's story isn't just about a job lost and a job gained. It's about a father who refused to compromise his values. It's about a daughter who saw her father stand tall when the world tried to shrink him. It's about a woman who spoke up for the man who saved her life. Most of all, it's about how quickly life can turn when integrity meets opportunity. Years later, Daniel would keep that worn-out stethoscope in his office drawer at the clinic, not as a reminder of what he lost, but as proof of who he chose to be. A single dad who risked everything for a stranger. A nurse who believed that rules should protect lives, not end careers. A man who discovered that sometimes the darkest 24 hours are just the bridge to something brighter than you ever imagined. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, someone watching this right now needed to hear that their setback is not the end. It might just be the beginning.